Alright guys, so today we're going to be going over the stratified auxiliary fuel system. Now this is being installed on a Nissan Juke. This is not for a Nissan Juke, but everything else is plug and play with the exception of these bolts. So you just have to get longer bolts to get these on the car. So I'm going to go over what everything is and then I'm going to show you guys how to install it in the car. This we're installing because we have aftermarket cams in this car and we're running into a fuel delivery problem, and we think that has something to do with the way that we changed the cam profile and the direct injection system. So we're just doing this to try to eliminate that as a problem. So I'm going to go everything from this side to that side so you know what it all is. So this is the actual ECU, or I guess you could call it the injector control unit, so the ICU. This is the brains of the operation. This is a computer in here, fully programmable. It has plugs for your injectors, ground, already comes with a fusible link. So, you know, it comes with everything you need to hook this up to the car. All the wires for the injectors are all here, for the ignition coils are all here. Then we have our hose. So this is a predetermined length hose for the Focus ST, but it does fit on the Juke. I have installed this on a Juke before, so I know that this all works. This is the software to actually tune the ICU. It all comes on a disc, which is actually really nice. Instead of having to hunt for it online, it just comes with it. The only thing that I have to complain about is you have to get the instructions off their website, but it is what it is. This right here is the fuel adapter, so this actually goes right before the high pressure pump. The fuel hose twists into here. This fits right onto the Juke, no modification. The factory fuel line even actually clips right in there. No problem. We got some Velcro, double-sided tape Velcro to hold the ICU wherever we need it. We have our bolts, a variety of zip ties, which is really nice. This is the only other thing that I don't really like about this system, is the way they actually want you to connect it to the coil packs is with these little red butt connector things. They work, they're just a bit of a pain in the butt to get to work. You gotta make sure you check continuity between the wire you're hooking up and this to make sure that it's actually piercing. They send you the fuel disconnect tools, which is really nice. You don't need all of these, but they send you a whole kit, which is really nice. This right here is the tuning cable. So this is actually the cable you use to interface with your computer to this. You have to pay extra for this, but they're working on the assumption that if you're putting this in a car, you're probably doing a couple of these, so you only really need one of these. Then we have the piece of resistance, and that is the stratified fuel rail with two 1000cc injectors and the throttle body adapter slash spacer. You can see here that there is a port for either nitrous or meth injection. On the particular car we're installing it on, we already have that stuff installed, so we're going to leave that plugged off. What's nice is even though this is designed for the Focus ST, is they actually have a port on either side for the fuel line to go in. So we can actually install this either direction, which gives us more flexibility installing this on the MR16 DDT. Again, this bolts right up. It's the same exact diameter, it's the same bolt pattern, everything bolts right up, which makes this really, really easy to work with. So that is all of the hardware that came with this. So now we're going to go ahead and actually start to install it on the car. So the first thing we're going to do is actually remove the battery. Most of what we need to work with is right here. We also need to remove the intercooler. If you don't have a top mount intercooler like this set up, you don't have to remove the intercooler, just one of the intercooler pipes. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this battery right out of here. Now I'm going to go ahead and actually get the intercooler out of the way so we can get access to the ignition coils, which is how the fuel injection system times itself. I'm not going to fully take everything completely apart. I'm just going to kind of tuck it out of the way as best I can. And the reason I'm doing that is to prevent me from having to rebleed the intercooler system itself. So I'm going to try to do this with as little disassembly as I can. Next thing we need to do is remove the throttle body. So I just need to remove this one coupler here. Again, if you were doing this on a normal car, a normal Juke, you would already have removed this with your intercooler pipe. Alright, just tuck that out of the way. So now that I have the coupler out of the way, I'm actually going to unplug the throttle body because the throttle body cable, the conduit is running over one of these, and then I'm going to just take all of these bolts out that are holding it in. Now, I already have the throttle body coolant system bypassed on this particular throttle body, but usually there are 2 hoses that you do need to take off of the throttle body, or you can just leave them on there and just tuck it out of the way with the hoses still in there. And I'm going to set this somewhere. Now we're going to come back over here, and you'll look at the stratified system. You'll notice the fuel injectors need to be facing downward now. Usually they would want you to put it kind of like this because that's the way there's most room, but obviously that is not going to fit in with our throttle body. So we are going to have to mount it this way. So it's going to be mounted so the actuator is over here and then your fuel rail is over here. Now you have 2 different options. You can either leave this way, run the 90 degree and just run the hose out and around, which is what I'm going to do, or you can actually take this off the plug, put it on the other side and then put your hose over there. It really doesn't make that big of a difference as far as the functionality of it all. Before that gets installed, you're going to have to run to the hardware store and pick up bolts that are long enough. So I suggest taking these bolts to the hardware store with you so that you have your thread pitch, or if you want, you can take the Nissan OEM ones. As you can see, the ones they provide you are only a couple millimeters longer than the factory bolts. The Focus ST uses a very thin throttle body setup, which is why it's like that. So you just need to get some longer bolts for that. So the next thing that I want to do is actually figure out where we're going to mount the brain of the operation. So I'm going to cut these and I'm going to just route it up, and then I'll show you guys where I put everything. Now before I mount this, I do have to say you need to mount it somewhere you can get to it pretty easily. If you take off the cover, I need to put the screws back in so tight. If you take off this cover, which is just 4 little tiny screws, you'll notice that that right there is actually the port that you need to plug into to be able to adjust and tune this. You can see it's all, very well weather protected, so I'm willing to bet you could put this in the engine bay, but I think I'm going to find somewhere nice and fancy inside the car to mount this up. Somewhere that's pretty accessible, somewhere that the cable doesn't need to be tugged on or have to worry about anything on the dyno when we're setting it up. So I'm going to leave the screws fairly loose as I set this thing up so that when I need to make sure my cable is going to fit and reach, I can. So I didn't like anywhere in the car. There wasn't really that much room or places where all the wiring would reach where it needs to go, so I picked a very controversial spot. It's actually now mounted on top of our Zex nitrous controller. So we don't need to get to the nitrous controller except for the button on the side, which I can still reach. It's in a spot where I'm actually going to be able to run the tuning cable in, and I can have a little strap to hold it next to it when we're not using it, and I can still get the cover off even when the battery's in place. Also, the power and ground loom are long enough to reach the fuse block that is inside the car, so that's good for a switch source. And then my wiring harness here for the fuel control, the injector connections and the ignition connections is plenty long enough to reach anywhere in this engine bay. In fact, I'll probably have to loop it up a little bit underneath the intake so that it's not in the way of anything. So now that we have that location figured out, the next thing I'm going to do is actually hook up the fuel line into the high pressure fuel pump. Yes, I know this is not the factory fuel hose, blah, blah, blah. We needed some way to tap in for the Zex nitrous kit, so we ran our own hose here. So this one actually is a lot easier to remove. You kind of just push forward, take a screwdriver and pop it off. Otherwise, you are going to need to play around with some of those tools that they sent you in order to get it off. There's probably still fuel pressure in here, so it's probably a really bad idea. Yep, a little bit. Okay, so we got that off. Now I'm going to take our little adapter that we have that came with the kit, and it literally just pops on. So just click, and then we click this one on. Make sure our fuel line is out of the way, which it is. It will be pretty close to the battery, but I don't think that's going to be a problem. And now we can go ahead and install the other parts associated with the fuel. Take my fuel hose and get it threaded in there. Again, not tightening it completely, I just want to get it in there so that I can route the hose. Okay, so I'll be able to tighten that up. Now I'm going to go ahead and route the fuel line where I want to go. Which I want it under there so that it's out of the way of all that. Be aware of your radiator fan. You don't want this thing getting clipped by the radiator fan. Obviously, that would be really bad. Now, I have not picked up my longer bolts yet, but I'm going to use the provided bolts to just hold the auxiliary fuel adapter in place so that I can get the hose on there and get everything where I want it. So again, this is just temporary. It also gives you a little bit more room to actually get in here to work. With the throttle body in there, you got that huge chunk of room taken up pretty badly. So this just provides a better way to do this. So those two will work just fine. Now I'm going to go ahead and get my fuel line caught. Again, don't worry about tightening it up yet. We want to make sure that we get everything where it needs to be before we actually start tightening things. So for instance, the fuel hose is out of the way of the fan, so I'm comfortable with that. It's out of the way of anything over here, so I'm comfortable with the way it's set up. So now I'm actually going to tighten up the lines. Now with that done, it's time to start hooking up the electronics. We're going to start with the easiest thing to do, which is obviously just plugging in the injectors themselves. So you're going to want to route this cable so that it doesn't get near anything moving, so that it can be easily kind of tucked away. So I'm actually going to route it down underneath a few things, and then I'll use cable ties, which they give you a ton of them, to kind of tidy everything up. I'll tidy the cables up after we're done with the installation. So next, we need to get these where they need to go. So we need to get to all of the ignition coils, which are these wires here. So really just run this so you can get it near where the ignition coil harness is, and then we'll do what wire goes to what after that. And then your power and ground needs to be hooked up to a switch power and a constant ground. So what I'm going to do is just run both of these through this little bulkhead that I have going on, and just hook it up to a switched power source with a proper fuse. Because it's a separate fused circuit from what you're going to be tapping into, for switched, I usually actually just use the airbag system. You know it's always switched, you know it's always working, and it's a separate fuse, so you're not going to actually hurt anything. As for the ground, anywhere that's metal or there's already existing ground, you can ground that out too. So I'm going to go ahead and toss these into the footwell. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is wire up the map sensor, and we do that with the provided green wire. Now, I saved you the trouble of finding which wire is our map sensor signal. That would be the white wire in the plug. So we're going to want to wire the green wire into the white wire. Now all of these yellow and black wires that we have to go to your, basically it needs to know how many RPMs the engine's at. So these all get wired into the coil packs. Now every single coil pack has a black wire in the middle of the plug. So you have 3 wires in the middle of the black wire. The black wire is your tack signal. So if you ever put the car in a dyno or anything like that, that's the wire that you tap into in order to get your tack signal. So I'm going to go ahead and wire all of these in where they need to go. I'm going to use the provided pieces that they give you to do this. I don't really like them, but I'm going to use them because that is what the kit has provided me with. So use what you are given. There's videos online on how to assemble these, so I'm not going to bore you with doing that, but I'm going to go ahead and just tap all of these in. Alright, so I have all the wires in there. I clean them up with some electrical tape to kind of make it look OEM. You know, as it ages, it will gray to be the same color as all the other stuff that I've had to shove under this thing, which is kind of obscene now that I'm looking at it. So now we're going to go ahead and install our throttle body. So I went to Home Depot and picked up this hardware. These are 75 millimeters long. They're an M6 by 1, I think is the thread pitch. And they will work. It's the longest one that they had, so that's what I bought. So what I'm going to do now is take the throttle body, and I'm going to plug it in first, and then I got to kind of finagle it back in. The reason I plugged it in first is because I have a feeling it's going to be a tight fit. So I'm actually going to loosen up this right here, which holds the coolant filled up. So now it's just a matter of lining up holes with holes. Alright, so once that's in there, it's just a matter of putting your intercooler piping back on. Now things are going to fit a little bit different, obviously, because you just spaced out the throttle body by about 1 inch. But you should be able to get it all on there with minimum modification. If need be, it is okay to take away 1 inch from a coupler or something like that, as long as it's clamped down nice and tight. So yeah, that is the installation of the auxiliary fuel system. Stratified has videos online on how to set it up and tune it, so I will leave that to them. But all in all, if I work all the way through, it only takes about an hour to install this system. 2 hours at the most for me. I'd expect somebody else to have just a couple more difficulties, as I have some specialty tools, so I'd put it at like a 4-hour installation. But again, something like this isn't really required on a factory turbo car or a car making under, I'd say, 350 to 400 horsepower. We are using this for a port injection system to try to test the theory we have about the cams that we have in here. So that is why we are using it, but this video is now out there in case 5 years in the future 400 horsepower Jukes are commonplace, which would be really cool. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. Make sure you go check out the new website we have up, thefastreligion.com. You can get all kinds of merch, decals, and you can also read more about the builds we're doing. In the meantime, why don't you check out these other cool videos that we have going on, and make sure you hit that subscribe button.